Well, welcome back, everyone, and hope you enjoyed your virtual networking break and got some time to spend in the content boost that we've prepared for you. We'll have another hour of this meeting set aside after the panel that you're going to experience next is complete. So if you didn't get a chance to check everything out, you'll have an extra hour at the back end to do so. We're now going to take a deeper dive into this discussion on how we increase as business the societal issues in our ESG strategies. You know, COVID-19 has created much grief and difficulties for so many in our society. In some ways, it shined a light on the problems we have in the structures of our societies in the world. And it's really impacted those most vulnerable the greatest. It has also literally kicked the scab off the wounds of social inequity, not only here in the US, but seemingly around the globe. You don't have to look hard to see the many faces of inequality and divide. But what is the role of business in addressing these deeply rooted issues? To get this discussion started, I'd like to invite Martin Whitaker to the stage. Martin, hi.
Hey, Bill. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
You're welcome. Martin is CEO of Just Capital, and I'm going to let him tell you the rest. Martin, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Bill. And again, it's a great pleasure to be here. It's been a great event so far, and we're very grateful that Just Capital has a chance to talk a little bit ahead of this exciting panel about the public's point of view. Just Capital is a nonprofit that captures the public sentiments related to business-related issues and then tracks companies on how they're performing against those issues. And the whole idea is you want to build a more just economy in order to address our major societal challenges. So the theme of this event, this day, has been absolutely central to our mission. What I'm going to do is walk you through some slides now which show data on how the public think about all the issues that we've been discussing, and a little bit of information on guidance for where we are today and where we might go into the future. And to do that, I'm going to share my screen. I have some slides. Quite a few of these are data rich, so forgive me if I walk through this very, very quickly. Just one second here. There we go. So what you see, we're calling it the Great Reset. This is really about the public's sense of corporate America's response to the pandemic and the racial equity issues that we are now confronting, as well as a roadmap for where we might go in the future. We found very strongly this is a moment where people agree that
hey, Martin, just wanted to interject. You're not sharing your screen, apparently, I'm being told. So I wanted to make sure you got that set up for us.
Let me just rectify that straight away. Apologies. How is this working right now? There we go. Is that
great?
Can you all see that? Fantastic. Okay. So again, we're sort of framing this as a great reset. How do people really think about where companies are today and what they might do in the future? As a guidebook for action. We think about structural problems. Let me just put this on in presentation mode. There we go. We've seen an emphatic response from the public that this is a moment where not only are structural problems in American society exposed, but people have really had their eyes open to corporate behavior, good and bad, during this moment. And what we've also found is that a majority of people feel as though we need a more evolved form of capitalism, inclusive capitalism, stakeholder capitalism, but a change in the way we pursue capitalism, not only if we're going to ensure greater good for society today, but also produce the kind of society that we want in the future for the next generation. And of course, we want an economy that works for all Americans. And so most people feel as though change is due. We've even seen people really strongly in support of corporate action and taking a stance on issues of social justice, issues of great societal importance. And here you'll see some results of how people would prefer corporate leaders to respond on matters relating to ending police violence, promoting Americans' right to freedom of speech, condemning racism, condemning the killings of George Floyd and Black men and women across America. So a desire for company leaders to be much more outspoken on societal issues, which I think is new. We've also seen, of course, people want companies to take action. And this can't just be about rhetoric. So interestingly, almost 2/3 of the 300 employers we're tracking right now, the largest employers in America who've made a statement in support of Black employees and Black Lives Matter. Yet we find almost 50% of companies we're tracking have no disclosure on any of those issues. This is something that we're tracking on an ongoing basis, and we find, companies in very different stages of readiness to actually be transparent about what they're doing on matters around workforce demographics in this case. So let's just focus on the response right now. We asked people, what should companies be prioritizing during the coronavirus crisis? And you see here down the left a list of issues. And on the right, obviously, you see, again, emphatic support for companies I'll look at the first issue, protecting the personal safety of frontline workers by providing PPE, personal protective equipment. And you can work that down. We see all sorts of support for flexible work arrangements, health and safety, paid time off, hazard pay, paid sick leave, and of course, avoiding layoffs being the single most important thing that we found as well. So we think this is a very clear green light for companies to be proactive on these issues. This is a glimpse of the tracker that we put up back in March, where we simply openly tracked how the 300 now largest employers in America are performing on a range of policies and practices. This is really available for anybody who's watching this or who might watch this in the future, just to click through and see what, for example, Walmart is doing on paid sick leave. We've now been able to track changes over time. What you see here are across all of those issues on the bottom, layoffs, hiring workers, health and safety, how the number of companies taking action on those things has changed, mainly increased over 5 periods from March through to early June. And interestingly, you see, for the most part, the number of companies taking action increasing on those issues. Yet on many things, for example, executive pay cuts, you see in June, the number of companies decreasing, which is why you see a slight curve in that right now. And obviously that's, that's a sort of a major issue if companies are beginning to, for example, cut back on paid sick leave when, in fact, the virus in America is still very much, a problem. And we've polled on very specific issues. We see, for example, here, we know the health and safety incredibly important to the American people. 63% of the companies that we're tracking have announced new health and safety measures around PPE. 37% have made no announcement. That doesn't mean to say they're not doing anything. It means that they haven't really changed or made a pronouncement publicly about doing something different or new related to coronavirus. Again, paid sick leave. We found that almost 70% of companies we're tracking have made no announcement at all on changes on paid sick leave. 31% have announced a new or a change or an evolved, improved paid sick leave policy. Financial assistance. We know that the vast majority of Americans want companies to prioritize hazard pay, for example, for frontline workers. Yet we find only 29% of companies that we're tracking have announced financial assistance to their workforce. Let's just focus on layoffs for a second. It was very clear throughout our polling, it still is clear, that people really want companies to avoid layoffs at all costs. Yet we found, again, this is sort of, also been changing quite rapidly. We found 25% of companies have actually announced furloughs of one kind or another, and 11% of the 300 largest employers we're tracking have announced layoffs. Interestingly, on the furloughs, over half of those companies continue to provide insurance to those furloughed employees. And I think that that's a good example of where a company can, even if their survival is threatened, even where there's the unfortunate need to furlough workers, that companies can still make that as just and as equitable as they possibly can. Let's just switch gears and talk about the reopening. Obviously, in America today, the economic reopening is the priority. What we found is that people still want companies to prioritize the health and safety of their workers. Say that again, 3 out of 4 Americans say large companies should be prioritizing the health and safety of their people, even if it means being more cautious in the reopening. And I think that stands to reason when people are worried about their health, not just as employees perhaps, but also as customers of businesses. People would rather, a company would rather experience financial strain, to look at the top bar here, than risk their health or the health of their family or their loved ones or others by going back to work too soon. We've also found it to be very important in this time of great uncertainty to be listening to your workers. You know, this is a great example, I think, of the humanity that's been also exposed during the last 3 months, the people's desire to help, you know, their fellow workers, their customers, the suppliers, to sort of this all, you know, we're all in this together kind of mentality. Here we see majority of workers willing to take a cut in hours or a cut in pay if it enables a coworker to keep their job. People would rather take a pay cut and keep their job than not. So I think what we're seeing here is a sense of real justness in just capital's parlance come through in the way companies can address these very difficult trade-offs sometimes between protecting workers through their health and safety and benefits and policies, pay, and furloughs and layoffs. Again, listening to workers being the salient point. Earlier in June, we published with Forbes a list of the top responders to the pandemic based on the tracker that I showed you earlier. And again, that was very successful. Companies were appreciative of the fact we were able to spotlight some of their leadership. Interestingly, we also found a very strong business case. Here you see the top 25 corporate responders on that list outperform their industry peers by almost 8%, whereas those in the bottom 25 companies underperformed their industry peers by almost 10% over the same period. An astonishing performance gap. And I'll come back and I'll show you another slide on the performance delta we think we're seeing as well in a moment. Just dwell for a second on the Great Reset. I think this is probably the salient message of this whole presentation, which is that there's an opportunity now. The vast majority of people surveyed across all walks of life, all backgrounds, believe that this is a moment where big companies can hit the reset button and begin to think about how to do right by their workers, their customers, the communities, and the planet. And I think that's a really important moment for us to figure out what that actually looks like. We've heard again emphatically, people will remember how companies performed during this period, the good things they did and the bad things they did. And again, I mentioned the performance delta earlier. Here you see from the beginning of the year, the top 20% of companies who are performing on a range of worker issues that I've described against the bottom 20%. And you see, again, over 7% return difference over the course of the year so far. So very, very powerful business case. We wanted to provide some sense of where we should go. How do people think where companies might be going over the next 12 months? And here you can see people's preference for example, at the top bar, vast majority of people, really urging workers to hire back laid off workers or furloughed workers when we return to normal versus hiring a new workforce. Continuing to offer employees the flexibility that they have right now. Continuing to enforce health and safety policies and practices. So again, this speaks to the earlier slide on how companies' actions were changing over time, and map that against how the public really think that some of these actions should really stick around and not be seen as temporary. So here are the
couple more minutes, Martin. We got to wrap up. Okay.
Yeah. So this is my final slide. So just the last major takeaways: be agile and responsive to your workers. Listen to your stakeholders. Prioritize health and safety. Really, where you can, think about how to make permanent a lot of the changes that you've made over the last 3 months during the pandemic and this period of social unrest. Expanding those benefits and not making them temporary. And lastly, issues 4 and 5, we've seen, as Bill mentioned, really, a huge amount of attention played on how Black and brown workers in particular are being disproportionately affected by that. So really, companies focus on ensuring that they apply an equity lens to not just hiring and layoffs and furlough decisions, but also pay, compensation, and other related issues. So to try and be as proactive as they can be to ensure that no workers of color are particularly inadvertently or disproportionately harmed. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Martin.
I can figure out how to do that, and I'll return to Bill and the panel.
Thank you, Martin. That really was some rich and useful data that I think is going to flow nicely into the panel discussion we're about to join into. I'd like to invite Joel Mchale to the stage. Joel is the co-founder, hi Joel, chairman and executive editor of GreenBiz Group. I'm sure many of you know Joel from his stage presence at various points in time in GreenBiz related events. And so we're really happy and frankly excited to have Joel with us here today to both introduce the panel and moderate the discussion that will ensue. So let's turn it over to Joel. Joel, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you for the whole WBCSD team for putting this together. It's always a pleasure to work with you. This is really just an incredibly interesting time. I think everybody knows that. I know that's not news. I've come to realize why that may you live in interesting times is indeed a curse. But we're just facing these tremendous challenges and opportunities. And that's always the case. We always have tremendous challenges and opportunities. But now there's this new palette of issues under the banner of justice: environmental justice, climate justice, economic justice, criminal justice, racial justice, all sort of rolling up into this rubric of social justice. Societal expectations are changing, leading companies to rethink, what is the role of business in the world these days? And Peter talked about stakeholder capitalism, and that's obviously a key part of it. And so we're seeing these issues cascade down, obviously climate and biodiversity and all the other key issues, along with health and well-being, along with personal and community security, and a just and equitable world. And this has become amazingly mainstream very, very quickly. And so the corporate response, lip service, not enough. Solidarity, not enough. Writing a check isn't enough. It used to be, but that's no longer the case. As Martin made clear, actions speak louder than words. So it's going to take this holistic, systemic approach and close that say-do gap. And I think a lot of WBCSD members are showing the way. And of course, all the other market conditions haven't changed either. The decarbonization of the economy, the need to create resilience in our brittle infrastructure and supply chains, the need for companies and systems to be adaptive and predictive from the perspective of energy, water, materials, and all the rest. So, and all the other business fundamentals that companies address every day. So the question is, what are the challenges and opportunities of this moment, and how is this moment influencing companies' global business strategies? And here have that conversation with me is Martin, who you've obviously met, along with Rocky Kumar, Senior Sustainability Solutions, Senior Vice President, Sustainability Solutions at Liberty Mutual, Gail Schuler, Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer at 3M, and Candace Lang, Vice President for Sustainability and Stakeholder Relations at Nutrien. So first of all, welcome all of you. Martin, let me just do a quick follow-up to your great, very information-rich presentation. I know everyone's going to want to download those or get access to those slides and see more. But how should companies think about prioritizing that list of what they need to be looking at and doing differently as we come out of this crisis or these crises?
Yeah, well, we found that companies are obviously in very different individual situations, depending on their industry, their financial situation, how resilient they've been, how well their culture and their businesses sort of anticipated crises and therefore been able to respond during the crises and the upheaval of the last few weeks and months. So I think a one sort of size does not fit all. Where I would say the framework for determining prioritization, to me, comes back to the stakeholder framework that we know the public wants business to embrace. We know the Business Roundtable signatories embraced last year, where a company is sort of now seeing its purpose as creating value for all of its stakeholders. And our polling offers a point of view on how the American public, on a fully representative basis, thinks about those priorities. And I think that's a great starting point. It's a good blueprint, a good roadmap for how companies might think about what they can do on worker-related issues, customers, communities, the planet, et cetera. But then, of course, they also have to examine that through the lens of their own particular stakeholders and how they feel as though they're balancing those needs or not, and where they could rebalance. So I think the prioritization needs to be shown through this new framework of a new outlook on the purpose of business, and then adjusted to make individual circumstances.
Yeah, it seemed that to a large extent that the prioritization had a lot to do with sort of Maslowian approaches, that health and well-being and personal security, and then job security, and then probably community, and then other local and global issues. But so I think that came through pretty clear, that my health and well-being and that of my family comes first, and the job,
Not
later.
Surprisingly. And in fact, in 6 years of polling, Joel, what we found is that worker-related issues, the bucket of issues related to pay equity, related to living wage, related to health and safety in the workplace, which was actually polling pretty high 3 or 4 years ago. Who knew it would become so important in 2020? It'll be interesting to see the priority weights for this year, which we'll be getting soon. But worker-related issues have always been the most important sets of issues.
Yeah. Great. Well, let's hear from 3 companies, and to a large extent, this panel is being brought to you by the letter S. How do we think about the social part of ESG? We've sort of, I think, arguably given it short shrift over the years, and now, as I said, and I think as everybody knows, it has come roaring front and center for so many companies. So I'd like to ask the 3 of you, and Rocky, I want to start with you. How is this social component influencing your global business strategy right now? How is this moment changing how you look at those strategies?
Thank you so much, Joel. And I want to thank the team at WBCSD for having this panel, even during COVID, because it's a very important topic. I would like to start by saying I'm actually on month 2 of my time at Liberty. I joined from State Street, and I'm, for the first time, on the company side. I've typically been an investor who's been engaging and voting on these issues, and now I'm here wearing a corporate hat. And part of the reason I actually picked Liberty as a place to get this experience and learn more about how to get it done right is because I'd heard it was a great place to work. And I've actually experienced that firsthand. And what was interesting is when I step back and think about why Liberty is the way it is, it's a mutual company. It doesn't have the stakeholder debate that we have to go through. It has a stakeholder focus. And that it looks at the three core components of the state as its key stakeholders, as its employee base, its customer base, and finally society. And just using the pandemic as an example, I've seen how they have worked through all three to service all three stakeholders. So, my personal experience onboarding during a pandemic, it was not so. Of course, I expected the company to send me my laptop, etc. Right? But they did that little extra bit of reaching out and saying, "Do you have a comfortable work environment at home?" They shipped me a chair. They shipped me, an online a monitor. Asked if I wanted a standing desk, right? And those small little things got me so engaged and made me feel so special compared to the number that you typically feel at a company, right? And then on the customer service side, there's this our mission is progress happens when people feel secure, because our whole business is around it. We gave auto relief programs, and then on the society side, we increased our philanthropy towards the local COVID relief operations by $15 million. So there's the stakeholder focus that we keep talking about from the investor side is really something that I've seen because we're a mutual. I suspect it's because we're a mutual.
Yeah. And coming out of this, you see that changing, or is this now baked into what Liberty Mutual is and does?
I actually think this is part of their DNA. They very clearly tell you when you're onboarding, they're a values-based company. They have this focus on doing the right thing, and we're on a journey from a sustainability perspective. My team is new. We really all came together only in May. They started the sustainability program only in December, but it doesn't mean that sustainability wasn't being practiced. It's just that it's not. We're bringing it together, and I'm still discovering things that are new. But often I'll have a conversation. They're like, "Oh, we're just doing this," and I'm like, "That's fantastic work, and you should talk about it." And they're just not used to talking about it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move over to Candace. And Candace, again, how is this moment impacting and affecting and influencing the strategy at Nutrien? And for those people who don't know about Nutrien, maybe just give us the quick elevator pitch.
Sure. Thanks, Joel. Well, Nutrien is an agricultural company, so we work on the input side, bringing services, solutions, basically in the field, boots to boots on the ground with growers, more than 500,000 globally, and the bulk of which of those are actually in the United States and Canada as well. So I'm going to start with the pandemic and then go into our ESG and sustainability strategy to answer your question, Joel, because I think just coming back to some of Martin's points of, and I think it's so significant that the indications that the performance gap that you highlighted, why is it that some companies, weathered the storm better? And then to link that to your question, Joel, about the priorities, I think the priorities depend on where you're starting from. If you've got some things in your foundation already, maybe those focus areas and priorities are different. But if you need some of those foundations, that's where you're starting, perhaps. But when the pandemic hit and we went into, our emergency management mode, we had to figure out how to operate as an essential service. I can attest personally to that list Martin outlined of how important it was that we had a strong foundation to draw from on the S pieces out of ESG, like our human capital management policies. If you just lean on them instead of needing to all of a sudden focus on them out of the blue, I think that is indicative of what made the difference and highlighted this performance gap. If you were already, set with a diverse supply chain, strong relationships in that supply chain, strong relationships in your communities where you live and operate, all of that then means you could weather that storm, which is just simply a dynamic risk. And I think that's what the ask is around ESG. And pre-pandemic, we weren't focusing enough on the S. It was very much, and I think we all know why, we were facing the climate crisis, so heavily over-indexed on the E. And now I think the pandemic has helped shine the light, as well as recent events in the Black Lives Matter movement, that the S has its rightful place right up alongside the E. And so when we look at positioning it in the strategy for Nutrien, for 1.5 years, we've had priorities in our sustainability strategy, of course, that address agricultural and environmental sustainability. But we had another priority as well that personally, in that over-indexed environmental focus, I was struggling with how do I bring it up to its rightful place, because it's about diversity and inclusive growth. And for our company, that's making sure extension services are offered equally to women growers as they are to men. It means that we are decreasing inequalities and increasing the opportunities we can to both women and racialized groups in our employment opportunities and our supply chain opportunities, et cetera. So that's probably enough kind of framework and color around the positioning of the S, but I think it's such an important time and to highlight this, the place that S has in ESG today.
I'm sorry. I think there's probably some issues around food affordability and accessibility, nutrition that are probably part of the mix. And we'll come back around that and maybe talk about some of that. But let's move over to 3M. Gail Schuler. Gail, talk a little bit about how this moment is affecting your strategy from the lens of the S in ESG.
Absolutely happy to do that. And thank you, WBCSD, for pulling us all together on this really important subject at this very important time. So 3M is a diverse manufacturing company ranging from consumer products like Post-it notes and Scotch tape to electronic solutions to the thing that we've all been focused on most recently is our personal protective equipment, notably N95 respirators. So with that diversity of activities, I'm sorry about my office mate here. With that diversity of activities and businesses going on, we have been tremendously affected by the pandemic. Since January, we have more than doubled our global manufacturing footprint for personal protective equipment like respirators and N95. We've gone 24/7 in our global operations across US, Asia, Europe, and really focused on redeploying and reinventing our manufacturing process and supply chain to deliver what's needed where, most importantly to healthcare providers, emergency response people, and of course, looking out for the health and safety of our employees. So that's what we did from a business perspective, and that's core to who we are. It's core to what our business is and what our safety and industrial business and healthcare businesses have been for a long time. And but where that fits within sustainability and our framework and our strategy is that we have 3 pillars of sustainability. And much as you talk about this as the S's, we think of our C's. So our 3 C's are about science for circular, advancing a global circular economy, science for climate, which, as many of you have mentioned, has been such a focus prior to now, and now we're kind of upended because science for community is really taking over in 2020. And when we think about our pillars, we do think about how do we offer solutions to our customers. So that gets to the PPE that we just discussed and how we help people work in safe environments, whether they're in healthcare or industrial settings or even personal protective equipment for consumers at home. But we're also based in the Twin Cities. So living right here in Minneapolis, we're right around the corner from where things started with the murder of George Floyd, with the reactions, the protests, the riots, all of that is right here in our backyard. And we have, so another piece of science for community is what we do within our organizations and our employee resource networks and how we engage with each other around diversity and inclusion on a global basis. We've been proud of in 2015, we set a sustainability goal related to doubling our pipeline of diverse talent in management. It was a really important decision to do it there rather than simply in hiring or simply in executive, because those pieces can be gamed a little bit. So we made it about management. But now we recognize that there's a much bigger need at hand. So we've hosted a number of listening sessions with our employees. We focused events with our employee resource networks. We have 9 of them. One is all about African American inclusion. And we're doing more and more to really look at what we're doing, as well as put some things in place from a foundational philanthropic perspective. So this has been quite the year for us, and there's been a major shift in our emphasis towards our pillar around science first.
Yeah, it sounds like everybody's trying to learn some new muscles. Let me ask a question to the 4 of you. One of the rubs on the environmental movement, and I think as well as on corporate sustainability, has been this disconnect between climate change, which arguably is issue number 1, and social inclusion, social justice, diversity, equity, and that whole range of issues. They've been seen as 2 separate things, and we're beginning to see the connectivity and the holistic view that these are inextricably linked. And I guess I'm wondering, before we all go to the dogs here, sorry, Gail, that how do companies better connect those dots, and not just connect the dots, but ideally integrate those in a very strategic way? Martin, I'm wondering what you're seeing.
Well, first, it's a great point. Going back to the mid-90s when I was studying environmental risk, the strong social dimension of those people disproportionately affected by pollution. I'm not talking about climate risk. I'm talking about localized contaminated land, groundwater, air, and the health implications of that. That's been a theme running throughout my career, is the social impact of that. When I worked at Swiss Re, we were all about trying to understand how climate risk would affect the disease vectors, for example, how it was going to be affecting industries around the world, and who those people would be, and how that might foment civil unrest and lead to tremendous social pressures. So I think that connection's always been there, Joel. I think when you look at the human impact of climate and other environmental risk issues, you have to ask, as we have done with COVID-19, who's being affected? Why? How are we protecting society? How are we helping those who are more vulnerable? Why are people more vulnerable? What are the inequities that have led to that situation? And how can companies just rethink their approach to this issue of ESG? One of the problems with ESG is, of course, it silos those things. And so people think about it in those verticals. And I think what we're realizing is that, this is so intertwined, and it's very, very difficult to make progress on one of these issues without being fully aware of the consequences across the board on other human dimensions. And I think that's been laid bare by coronavirus, sadly.
Yeah, Rocky, at Liberty Mutual, you're, as you said, you're not necessarily burdened by the shareholder tyranny. So does that give you freedom or license or room to move around integrating what in effect is environmental justice, climate justice, and equity and inclusion, financial inclusion, and all of that? What does that enable you to do?
Yeah, actually, that's interesting. And I want to go back to our main business, right? So we are insurers, and we are a people-centric business. If you think about what our main job is, we actually help people identify risks they don't know that they may be, or are unaware that they may be exposed to, and then we offer protection against it. And so our lines really cross this E, S, and G spectrum, right? It could be worker compensation, it is D&O insurance, EEO insurance, auto policies, property insurance, agriculture, crop insurance. So it really does go through the E, S, and G spectrum. And what we're trying to do is stay away from this siloed ESG perspective. What we're trying to do, and as I said, we're early days, so we're building out this program. And as we're building out the program, we're really focusing on a goal of creating that sustainability mindset across the enterprise. And by enterprise, we are focusing on 3 levels. One is our own operations, so as a company, and then the second level is that in our underwriting business, that's the insurance business. And the third level is the investments that we manage on behalf of, as an asset owner. And so those are, and within that, incorporating ESG is important. And what we're trying to do is build frameworks where it's important to allow for the businesses to consider this ESG, this language of ESG, which is very broad, as to how does it impact their sector, their business. What are the core drivers of their business? Is it people? Is it humans? Is it environmental? And the prioritization around the topics and creating the framework for them to address it in a mindful manner is key for us as we go forward.
And is there an opportunity, a business opportunity in that, in terms of improving access to some of your financial products, for example, to those who may not be able to afford them yet, who may arguably need them? What do you see there?
Yeah, so I have to confess it's early days for me, so I'm still learning, and I'm probably not very equipped to answer that question. But I do know that innovation and these issues are front and center, right? So it's and I think the reactiveness or the proactiveness that went on in the personal auto policy relief that was introduced for because people were not driving cars. So I think that's an example where they have the pulse. The business has the pulse on what's going on with the customer, and they are ensuring that they are servicing customer while building that relationship.
Candace, as I said before, you're in the food and nutrition and agricultural business, and there's obviously a lot of issues around food security and access to food and food deserts and obesity and hypertension and diabetes in the food systems in general. What do you see as the opportunity and the role for Nutrien there?
Yeah, well, let me switch from ESG to SDG, if I may, for a moment then. Because I think, to answer your other question, that how do we connect these things? I really believe that SDGs were constructed in a way that really brought some systems thinking into these challenges, because they are all connected. And yet then when we go to solutioning, I think we get very human about it and try to, for the sake of action, we start compartmentalizing. And I call that, we end up whack-a-moling the SDGs with impacts, and perhaps, Martin, you were going to the realm of unintended consequences. And then where are we at the end of the day? So before the pandemic, I had quite a few conversations that were trying to bring the perspective on the nexus we have with food and climate. So yes, we can do some things in terms of the emissions in agriculture around climate, but if you have to look at the system and which 2.5 billion people does that impact in terms of access to food if we solve this? And so that systems thinking approach is so important. But I will say, in the SDGs, if you go that layer deeper and really study the indicators, they are connected. So in SDG 13, climate action, it says we must find solutions that don't harm agricultural productivity. And in SDG 2, which is about ending hunger, it makes the link to, do we realize how this connects if we actually bring people into getting them the tools and access to extension services they need, how that lifts so many people out of poverty as well. So yeah. So that's one important point, I think, and it takes a lot of systems thinking and some patience, I think, in that. But the biggest opportunity, and I think this is where we're headed into 2021 with the focus on Food Summit and overall food and agricultural system transformation, is our next opportunity. And I'm actually quite, if one can be grateful, or what's the saying, never waste a crisis. I think the pandemic has actually helped us refocus on some learnings that, because they weren't real for us, have been brought forward on, sensitivities in supply chain in the food system, and bringing those forward as we go into the work of transforming, which is going to be a big task, the food and agricultural system, and focus on leading up to that Food Summit in 2021.
Yeah, and big opportunities to also help your various publics, internal, external, upstream, and downstream, understand some of those linkages between the products and services and the social and environmental issues. It seems that's an ongoing challenge. Let's turn to Gail and your executive assistant there. 3M has this tremendous legacy, history, track record of innovation. As you look at that, and again, in this moment, where do you see opportunities to solve multiple problems in a way that, I mean, maybe makes money for 3M? That's always, I know, a desirable thing, but I know with some of the PPE work that profit motive isn't the #1 priority. Where do you see those kinds of opportunities to leverage your innovation machine?
That's a great question, and something that, as a member of our corporate technical operating committee, I've been extremely involved with. So our supply chain organization, our operational group, is focused on scaling and ramping all of those PPE to deliver results. But also at the same time, there's an innovation challenge for us, right? So because of our diversity, we've come back, and you may recall, Joel, we've talked before about the sustainability value commitment that 3M has put into every new product that we launched. So starting last year in 2019, every new concept, every new idea for a new product that came forward was required to, before it would launch, have a sustainability value commitment. Now, that might be about reducing our footprint in our own operations from a climate or water perspective. It might be something that helps our customers reduce their environmental footprint. But now more than ever, we're using that same foundation that we've set, that framework that we've made, to look at what can we do to address this particular challenge with the pandemic. So we've really assembled our R&D teams, our marketing teams, to understand what those needs are, and to bring forward new products that we think will help people in this time. So for example, already mobilized things that you're going to see in the next few months in our consumer channels are new disinfectants coming from our home care products. We're seeing things in our consumer healthcare division that we're going to be offering both new cloth masks. We typically had offered ones that we produce for medical or for industrial usage, but now we're offering new solutions that are specifically targeted towards consumers. And we're going to be offering new solutions for disinfectants, sanitizers, hand sanitizers, as well as a range of solutions for our industrial channels and healthcare. So we're really trying to mobilize that. Candace, I use that phrase as well. You never waste a good crisis. Recognize what's unique in the time that we live in and how we can make an impact with that. So that's what we're trying to focus on now. And I just gave you some examples that are probably a little bit ahead of their time, but you know that we'll work in areas like that.
Yeah, we can all thank Rahm Emanuel for that great crisis opportunity line. Gail, I've, as you noted, been aware of the sustainability commitment of integrating sustainability attributes to every new product, and that, I think, as you indicated, had been largely environmental, and now you're saying some piece of that is related to health and well-being, the healthcare issues. What about on the other aspects of social equity, inclusion, access, climate justice, environmental justice, access to food, energy, water? Do you see that part of that playing into this innovation mandate?
Absolutely. So we've talked about our 3 pillars. So circular is largely related to waste and things like that. Climate, obviously, carbon footprint, et cetera. When we talk with our teams internally, sometimes they try to put things into the buckets, whether it's circular or climate or community. And what we're recognizing more and more is that there's a tremendous overlap between them. And so that's something that we don't. I'm sorry. She ignores me until I get on a call like this, I swear.
It's good to have a pet project. Yeah.
But we realize, that it's not a clean bucketized type of thing. And more we're looking at, this idea of climate justice. And so how does that fit with social justice and the uneven distribution of effects from pollution, as was mentioned, or climate effects, air quality issues, for example. We've partnered with an organization called Clean Air Asia, where the world's largest concentration of poor air quality exists, to help them advance solutions for that. We've advanced our philanthropy locally, whether it's for the social justice movements or for environmental challenges. We track very carefully our purchasing with suppliers, from small enterprises, from diverse suppliers, and we today purchase over $1 billion from those types of profiles, and committed to always evaluating and increasing on those dimensions as well, because it's just such a combination of different factors that need to be addressed, whether it's in your own operations, where we're certainly reevaluating and continuing to advance things that we do for our customers to help them address those challenges, but also, you know, how we can have an impact on the broader community.
Yeah. We talk a lot, and certainly WBCSD, around collaboration, partnerships. That's central to pretty much everything that needs to be done in sustainability and the world. And I'm wondering, we've been talking about this so far from the lens of the company, individual companies, but what I'm wondering, ask you, and you can, I'm not going to necessarily go around, although we might, but just raise your hand if you want to jump in. What do you need in terms of collaboration that would help you, and this is specific to the social aspects of this, the social issues, not necessarily the environmental ones, that would help you go further, faster in this this whole range of issues that we're talking about? Who wants to take that on? Yeah.
So
Rocky.
I'm going to start, you know, so when I came in, you know, I was told our S is very strong, right? And I experienced that, and I've given you examples of it. And I was going through a why, and I think we have a D&I office, a diversity and inclusion office, who's been there for 7 years, and they've been at it, and they are very well established now. They have done a lot of work, groundwork that is needed to make S really strong within, and I think there was a question on culture. The S culture is very prominent here because, and I think it's because of the D&I initiative. So even when the social justice issue happened, immediately I was actually surprised that we had a town hall, right? And the town hall with CEO who was there, who didn't say much, but he had others. And just by having the CEO on that panel for the town hall, employees were listening. So they made employees listen. They gave Juneteenth as a paid vacation, right? And these are things that were done with the idea that they wanted employees to hear about people's pain and anger, and figure out how they felt about it. And space was created in the organization in a very short time, in a very structured manner, to allow for that. And I do credit us having a very strong D&I program for that.
Yeah. So that sounds like an internal collaboration initiative. Do you see anything external? Would you join forces with MassMutual, where they also have a very new sustainability director, Cindy Drucker, to look at how can we move forward together, or what can we do together that neither of us can do alone? And I don't mean to pick that company in particular, but anyone else in your sector.
So one of the things we have done is brought together our peers in the CSO office, in our insurance, from our competitors, with the idea that ESG is something that impacts all our businesses, and let's talk about our challenges and how we are doing it, so we can share with each other. So we actually did that, and our first meeting was, I think, in May.
Yeah, good. Candace or Gail? Let's go Martin and then Gail. Martin?
Yeah, just looking across the system, your question, and I'm just going to respond to sort of like collaboration between companies and between industries. We do see that. Thinking of the World Economic Forum, they're coming to stakeholder capitalism. But I think it's going to be very difficult to create true systems change where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, without a common set of ways to measure and ways to gather data so we can track progress. We see companies at Just Capital who are really across the spectrum in terms of sophistication around how they're measuring progress on a range of non-traditional issues, what data they're using. It also makes it very difficult for investors to track progress. There has been a lot of initiative around the E of ESG, but I don't think we've seen near as much progress on social issues. So I would like to see a much more coherent cross-sectoral effort to embrace a set of, first of all, a North Star around what do we mean when we say stakeholder capitalism? What does business success mean in the 21st century? How we create value, what do we mean by that? And then how are we going to measure progress? And I think that's a tremendous learning opportunity for companies to learn from one another, because we see best practice in different companies at different times, and it'd be wonderful to have that shared knowledge benefit everybody.
Oh, if only there was an organization that brought companies together to talk about sustainable development, business, and globally. I don't know. We'll figure that out. Gail?
Yeah, so this is going to be an example of how differently you can approach these problems, or these even understanding of what the social challenges are. So I talked about, we see it from our products perspective, our internal issues and external. One of the things that's really come to light, if we call a pandemic a societal issue, and I would argue that it is, one of the things that's really happened during this time is we've had the opportunity and challenges of working closely with governments on what the regulations are, with working closely with organizations like FEMA to properly distribute, with the CDC to identify ways that respirators can be reused. In how do they get resanitized? How do they get recleaned? Products that were intended for single use. We've also partnered with organizations like Ford Motor Company, where we produce a powered air purifying device that's used in industrial or healthcare applications. It's typically a small runner for us, quite honestly, but when Ford found that they had their manufacturing lines down, this was something that they could actually, we worked together very quickly to develop a simplified, low-cost solution that they could produce on their lines, and we helped them train to do that so that we could rapidly increase the production, or arguably it didn't exactly exist, but it increased the production of those types of units in a broader base. So we found very creative ways to partner during this critical pandemic time. What would be better is if we had planned better for it collectively in advance. So we try to do that, and we will try to do that. But I think that from a government perspective, or from some of these uncommon partnerships perspectives, it's difficult to imagine all of them in advance. So we could do a better job if it wasn't a big rush all of a sudden. How do we help? How do we plan for this? So that is something that our team, for example, is making notes on and learnings on, and we're going to try to do some preparation when it's not under the gun in the future. But this time, I think there's been a lot of great progress that's been made, and much more that we could do if we prepared more in advance.
Well, we are getting the hook from young Mr. Sisson here, so we're going to have to get off the stage and move on. But I want to first of all thank the four of you. This great conversation, and just talk about how much this conversation is just really getting going, and I really look forward to continuing it over the next year and years, and seeing the kinds of progress you all are making, and the kinds of collaboration that is coming together, and the metrics behind that is such a rich area and a very exciting one that we can make indeed an opportunity out of this crisis. Thanks again. Bill, over to you.
Joel, thank you so much, and thank you for the youthful compliment. Much appreciated. No, really, thank you all, Rocky, Gail, Candace, Martin, Joel. This discussion, which over the last 40 minutes was rich and deep, and I think we're just scratching the surface, unfortunately. But it was a great discussion, and thank you so much. Look forward to working with you more in the future. Yeah. Listen, we're really hoping you've enjoyed today. There's no way I could possibly summarize this discussion in any useful way. We're recording this event, so you'll be able to rewatch it and reconnect to the content as you need to. We'll also be leaving the session open for continued networking and also continued engagement with our content booths for the next hour. Let me just close by saying something about WBCSD that's relevant to the conversation we just heard. You know, at WBCSD, if you're a member, you know we do foster and facilitate a broad sector and cross-sector collaboration across a number of the ESG challenges our companies are facing today and can't solve on their own. And this is the core premise of our organization in terms of how we allow members to understand their purpose and take that purpose to action. Just to comment on some scoping activities that we have launched as part of next year's initiatives, there are 3 very relevant scoping pieces that Peter mentioned, one of which Peter mentioned. First, tackling inequality, a social contract to the 21st century, collaboration activity number 1. Healthy people, healthy planet, to address, in fact, the health issues and concerns that were raised throughout today's discussion. And then finally, sustainability ready product lines. And this gets into the whole world of how we need to innovate better and differently if we're going to provide solutions in the marketplace. So thank you all for joining. I'll be hanging around the Hop-In app if any of you would like to connect and network with me. Thank you to the team that I introduced earlier in this session after panel 1. They really worked hard to pull this off, and I hope you've all enjoyed the events today. So enjoy your time. Please stay safe and stay well, and I look forward to engaging with you and our expert panelists and speakers in the future. Thank you.